Vladimir Lenin declared only months after the successful October Revolution in 1917 that, quote, "without the revolution in Germany, we are doomed." Since the communist movement fundamentally hinges on the unity of the international working class, it would have been of
what could have been, chatters,
massive benefit to have an industrially developed socialist ally to support the construction of socialism in Russia.
To be fair, we don't know. We don't know what Europe would look like. There could have been a battle line drawn where internal pressures might have escalated against FDR. Maybe the business plot succeeds in that circumstance. Maybe FDR never, maybe the New Deal never occurs. And America is the continuation led by the American Bund movement. Maybe America is the continuation of fascist autocracy, and they try to fight and plunder the rest of the world, and the United States becomes the Germany of World War II. So there's also that aspect of it as well. America turned fascist? No, I mean, America was aligned against the fascists in World War II. But as I say all the time, as I like reiterating all the time, things could have been very different for America.
And likewise, it was the Great October Revolution that massively accelerated and supported the establishment of councils all over Hungary, Austria, or Germany. Quote, "We shall achieve victory only together with all the workers of other countries of the whole world," Lenin stated later in April 1918. Defeated revolutions are quickly forgotten, yet from the perspective of the working class, this revolution should not be brushed aside. There is not only lots of lessons to be drawn from this period, but it is immensely inspiring to have history reaffirm that workers' power in Europe is possible, despite the sheer strength of the capitalist class.
There are way more Germans who hate Nazis than Nazis. Please acknowledge that. Brother, I'm talking about, and this video is detailing something that you are, I think, unable to understand, perhaps as a German person yourself. We're talking about German liberalism and how it made way for the Nazi movement, how it actually developed momentum for the Nazi movement. This entire video is directly about all of those people who ostensibly now hate the Nazis, because the exact same attitude is growing. The exact same sentiment is growing in Germany at this moment. We're looking at history in order not to repeat its mistakes, but you are, it seems, unable to understand that and are literally saying, no, we will repeat those mistakes actually, and you will shut the fuck up about it, as we are in the process of repeating said mistakes in Germany.
It is this explosive potential of revolutionary inspiration that is among the reasons the history of the German Revolution is twisted or straight up denied. Quote, "A German revolution after World War I? A West German undergraduate in my German history survey indicated she had never heard of such a thing, and until the 1960s the same was probably true of most Western academics," said Robert Wheeler in the late 70s. Winston Churchill derided it by claiming it was part of a Jewish conspiracy. Of course, other liberal commentators state that it was in this period that democracy won against dictatorship. Another reason this revolution is not mentioned very often is that it is a period of great shame for the supposedly progressive liberal forces, since it showed how they had zero concerns about collaborating with the most reactionary and bloodthirsty elements of society in crushing the movements that endanger the capitalist system. In Germany, the party mainly responsible for that cooperation, the SPD, has been one of the main ruling forces in the German government ever since, now claiming the chancellor position with Olaf Scholz since 2021. The story of the German Revolution is the story of how that party evolved from the, at the time, most developed Marxist organization to an open representative of capitalism, a supporter of imperialist war and a defender of class society. It is thus key in understanding today's left and the nominally left social democratic parties, since what had become concrete during this revolution isn't just important for grasping the politics of Germany, but in understanding the revising of Marxist principles and their subordination to the bourgeoisie as an international trend. This video will encompass the build-up to the revolution, without which it is impossible to grasp the underlying political forces that led to it, and that ultimately betrayed it. In fact, the betrayal had begun long before the start of the revolution. It's the story of the definite split between social democracy and communism, which would forever shape the socialist movement. movement. In the next part that I'll release within the next few days, we'll talk about the events of the German Revolution and how that split manifested. The content of this part is especially topical, since it enlightens the struggles within the so-called left about the correct Marxist position during imperialist aggression, considering the current war in Ukraine and the danger of escalation into a new world war. Everyone interested in ending capitalism, in Marxism or socialism must learn about this period. This video will be mainly based on these works. They have all their particular biases I don't agree with, so I have tried to synthesize all of those different perspectives while adding a bit of my own analysis. The German state is a fairly recent formation. For multiple centuries, Germany referred to a group of various German-speaking states in Central Europe. They were often very divided and subject to the influence of far greater empires. Most people in these states didn't identify as Germans, but as Prussians, Bavarians, or Saxons. Unlike in France or in other European states, Germany had not managed to overthrow the monarchy. In 1848, inspired by the revolutions in France and elsewhere, the masses in the German states attempted to do the same. One of their goals was to achieve unity. By the end of 1849, however, the revolts were crushed. The German bourgeoisie failed to unite the various German states, not just because it was weaker than France's, but under the threat of a strong proletarian movement, it preferred to ally itself with the monarchic forces. It's not the last time we would see this alliance against the working class in Germany. The structures of the monarchy persevered, but they adapted themselves to serve the needs of the quickly growing business class. Eventually, in 1871, unity was—
This is why this is like the first iteration of the welfare state and the development of the welfare state in an effort to continue, I guess, under a monarchy, under a monarchical structure. There were like social benefits that basically gave life a extension to the continuation of the same exact structures that abuse the working class in an effort to retain the wealth in the hands of the few.
Was achieved at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, which had also sparked the creation of the Paris Commune, the first workers' state. Bourgeois historians often praised the prowess of Otto von Bismarck for achieving unity and for being the founder of the modern welfare state. But the unification into the German state manifested as a result of various complex developments. Unity served the needs of the rising bourgeoisie, and especially of the ruling classes in Prussia, who now dominated the newly formed federation.
This is why one analysis, I mean, I wouldn't even say one analysis, but like a direct analysis of like welfare capitalism is from a Marxist perspective is that welfare capitalism is a nefarious way in which you marginally improve working class conditions in an effort to not starve them to a degree that they rise up and destroy the capitalist mode of production. And there is truth to that matter. I mean, it's without welfare reforms, the idea is that capitalism is crushed under the weight of its own contradictions.
Prussia containing more than half of the population and most of natural resources. And the establishment of a welfare state wasn't simply out of a concern for the working class. Prussia's king was now also the German emperor, which was Wilhelm I of Prussia, from the imperial house of Hohenzollern. The other states had their own kings or grand dukes. Each state had their own version of governance, with Württemberg even adopting universal suffrage. The imperial government was responsible for policy regarding the whole country, such as the navy, commerce, and foreign relations. The emperor delegated those matters to the imperial chancellor, which was Otto von Bismarck. The chancellor title is still in use in Germany for the head of government today. This unified German state now quickly transformed itself into the second greatest industrial power in the world, even overtaking Great Britain, and thus creating a large working class within a short period of time. Concessions were made to the petty bourgeoisie and some minor ones to the working class, both as a byproduct and political convenience of the rising German capitalism. But the state continued to be ruled by the Prussian landowning aristocracy, the so-called Junkers, of which Otto von Bismarck was the most prominent. These ruling classes weren't subject to the Reichstag, the empire's parliament, chosen by male suffrage and with little to no actual power, and which ultimately answered to the emperor. Most of the liberal middle classes had been won over by the monarchist National Liberal Party. Bismarck had used the interests of the bourgeoisie to advance German industry and the interests of the upper middle classes to consolidate the new bourgeois hierarchy. Those concessions were not irrelevant. Within the first 10 years, life expectancy rose by over 10 years, and 12-hour working days became 10-hour days. Otto von
You can also look at like somewhat, you can find similarities within another. I mean, I'm not talking about Bismarck here, but like obviously fascists in America, capital owning fascists in America, like Henry Ford, also recognize the many benefits and the improvements in productivity that he would see out of his workers when he streamlined some of these processes in his own factories as well. So the irony, of course, is that like the consistent rent seeking and consistent profit maxing attitude that our capital owners have now actually leads to less productive results down the line. So even now, if we were to have more benefits in the direction of a true social democracy in the United States of America, we could actually legitimately improve productivity, but it's not even a thing that people consider nowadays because of short-term thinking.
Bismarck established the first welfare state in modern industrial society. The main goal was to gain working class support by directing it away from the rapidly growing socialist opposition. Social democracy today refers to something entirely different than what it used to in the 19th century. People of the revolutionary left used to call themselves social democrats, such as Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht of Germany, or Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks were part of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which was firmly based on the theories of Marx and Engels. The biggest social democratic party at the time was the Social Democratic Party of Germany, or the SPD. Lenin, up until the beginning of the 20th century, praised the SPD as the most advanced social democratic organization, saying that German social democracy, quote, had always upheld the revolutionary standpoint in Marxism. The change in the meaning of social democracy roughly went like this. First, it meant Marxism. Then, it meant socialism, but through
Desperate for pussy voice. Desperate for pussy voice, Lenin. Social democracy in Germany is really cool. I love Rosa.
reform, not revolution. And today it means capitalism with stronger social safety nets, or the so-called Nordic model, what they have in Sweden, for instance. In order to understand how this shift in definition happened, it is essential to learn about the history of the SPD and the German Revolution. In the period before the German unification, German social democracy was split into two currents. There were the Lassallians, who followed the teachings of the more reformist Ferdinand Lassalle, and the so-called Eisenachers, who claimed to uphold the teachings of Marx and Engels. The two most prominent Eisenachers were August Bebel and Wilhelm Liebknecht. They were the leaders of the Social Democratic Workers' Party of Germany, the SDAP, founded in 1869 in the German town Eisenach, hence the label Eisenachers. The two groups were very divided. When Bebel and Liebknecht refused to vote for war credits for the war against France in 1870, the Lassallians suggested they should be jailed for their opposition to the war. However, a few years later, after the unification had happened, members of the two groups urged the unification of German social democracy. In 1875, in the German city Gotha, the two factions managed to come together by adopting the Gotha program, the party platform of the SPD. At the time, Marx and Engels were heavy influences on the party leadership. They had become the most influential intellectual leaders of the socialist movement. Wilhelm Liebknecht, for instance, had developed a strong friendship with Marx and collaborated with him throughout his life. Marx and Engels weren't big fans of the Gotha program, however. Marx wrote the Critique of the Gotha program and sent it to the leadership of the SDAP. The program was criticized for its concessions to the Lassallian current, such as reformist deviations from revolutionary Marxist theory or the faulty analysis of German society, among other things. The document is now part of the Marxist classics. It discusses the importance of proletarian internationalism or the dictatorship of the proletariat. There are still many attempts to separate those two concepts from Marxist theory today. Although not entirely united in ideology and overall tactics, the party grew very quickly. A mere 2 years later, the party boasted close to 500,000 votes, which was over 9% of the total. The SPD became involved in nearly all aspects of society. It established countless trade unions, cooperatives, youth and women's organizations, or newspapers. The SPD was by far the biggest working class organization worldwide. Lenin said about the German working class that for almost half a century, it was, quote, the model of socialist organization for the whole world. German social democracy became a way of life, being involved not just during labor struggles and elections, but in people's leisure time. They established and became affiliated with chess clubs, a swimming association, the Free Sailing Union, cyclist magazines, music.
See, it fell apart because of their, this is a bourgeois moral failing right here. It's called fun time, and fun time should not be allowed. Their fun time should have been reading, like these guys are doing, but like reading more communist literature, theory. Sailing, it seems like bourgeois interest to me. Being a communist and being a socialist implies that you cannot have fun. Okay, fun is not allowed. Fun time is bourgeois decadence. You must always be angry. You must always be seeking to improve the material conditions of the working class, uplift the working class. If you are having fun, that means you are not fighting the revolutionary fight. You are actually a counter-revolutionary.
And singing groups, libraries, and even a free people's theater to spread class consciousness and critiquing the status quo through drama. Lenin wrote enthusiastically about these organizations. These leisure time organizations were important for another reason. In 1878, Otto von Bismarck managed to institute laws restricting the rapid development of the workers' movement. Hence, more indirect and clandestine forms of organization and propaganda became important. Within the first year of enacting these so-called anti-socialist laws, the Imperial German government outlawed about 250 associations, as well as close to 200 periodicals and over 300 non-periodical newspapers or magazines. This crackdown did not significantly slow down the socialist movement, however. Through a kind of Barbara Streisand effect, it even led to an increased membership long-term and raised class consciousness by making it apparent that the state viewed the socialist movement as a threat. So, many party activists reacted to state persecution by embracing Marxist revolutionary principles. In the 1880s, the party had reaffirmed that it was revolutionary.
It is a legit tactic to use treats to distract people, though, but I get what you mean. Dude, treats are great. That's the whole reason for why you want some kind of change to the current existing organization of the economy so you can have fucking treats and free time. That's the whole point. That is literally why I care about these sorts of things, because I want everyone to have the amenities and the fun and the free time. And so did Marx, really. This is why the idea that like socialism is actually a deeply collectivist ideology that has no basis in like individual freedoms is a inherently reactionary bastardization of why people want socialism to happen. The entire point is so that people can have fun, people can have treats, people can have luxuries, people can have whatever they wish to have,
with no illusions in parliamentary methods. However, although repression failed to destroy social democracy, it did lead a great part of the party toward a more moderate direction and opportunism. Since the laws didn't outlaw participating in the electoral theater while hurting the most radical and visible activists. August Bebel wrote in a letter to Liebknecht that a position in the Reichstag, quote, satisfies their ambition and their vanity. With great self-complacency, they look upon themselves as among the chosen of the nation and find immense pleasure in the parliamentary comedy. They take it very seriously. This had a great effect on the party membership. Revolutionary theory was only marginally connected with most of what the party actually did. Another factor adding to the complacency of many social democrats was the success and the...
Yeah, but prioritizing fun is unhelpful. That's how liberalism happens. You have to be joking. You cannot be serious right now. I don't believe that you're being serious. I'm going to assume that you're joking.
Relative stability of emerging German capitalism and minor concessions to the working class. Although behind many of these achievements was the working class struggle, not parliamentary activity.
Guys, stop saying Rust, all this stuff, okay? I'm going to get into Rust when my team is ready, okay? None of them are ready right now. What do you want me to do? Do it on my own? No, I'm waiting for my fucking team.
What was crucial was
I'm going to eat, we're going to watch this, and then I'm going to play Rust.
That capitalism had entered a new stage at the turn of the century, its highest and last stage according to Lenin, imperialism. In addition to the profits appropriated in their own countries, the monopoly capitalists now increasingly appropriated so-called super profits from the colonies and semi-colonies. Capitalists in the imperialist countries could now use those extra profits to, quote, bribe, unquote, the working classes in their own states, leading to higher wages for a section of the working class, which came to be called the labor aristocracy. For instance, well-paid managers, bankers, or engineers. Though still part of the working class, many of these people see themselves as superior in social status, weakening class solidarity. It is this social stratum, Lenin says, that became the basis of various social democratic parties in Europe. He wrote, quote, "This stratum of workers turned bourgeois, or the labor aristocracy, who are quite Philistine in their mode of life, in the size of their earnings and in their entire outlook, is the principal prop of the Second International, and in our days the principal social prop of the bourgeoisie. For they are the real agents of the bourgeoisie and the working class movement, the labor lieutenants of the capitalist class, real vehicles of reformism and chauvinism. In the civil war between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, they inevitably, and in no small numbers, take the side of the bourgeoisie." This was also reflected in the composition of party leadership that became increasingly dominated by so-called high-skilled professionals or small business owners. This and the relative peace in Europe nourished complacency.
Would you characterize the HVAC business owners as labor aristocracy? No. HVAC business owners would be firmly petty bourgeoisie. Small business owners are in the petty bourgeoisie camp. They are capital owners. Their earnings are obviously marginal in comparison to big business, but ultimately they themselves still hire labor. They are a part. Sometimes they literally work as well. In many instances, they work as well, but they are petite, tiny, small business owners. But their revenue growth and their wealth relies on still relies on hiring other workers. So ultimately, they are still very much aligned in class interests with larger business owners. Labor aristocrats, on the other hand, would be the professional managerial class, doctors, engineers, lawyers, and the like.
And the belief that maybe incrementalism was the way forward. However, we need to keep in mind that higher wages under capitalism does not mean lower exploitation. Shorter working hours usually go along with higher intensity of work under capitalism. The progress in productivity meant that wages could be improved in absolute terms, but in relative terms, exploitation increased. This means that while wages increased a little bit, they didn't keep up with the increased productivity, which overwhelmingly benefited the income of capitalists. As one economic historian explains, the, quote, "relative income of the workers in 1914 was only about 1/3 of what it was in 1860. The rich had become enormously richer and the national wealth of Germany had grown, but the workers' share in this wealth had declined rapidly. The relative deterioration of the workers had proceeded at a speed probably unsurpassed in any country in Europe. But it takes political consciousness to understand this. The great majority could obviously be fooled by the dominant narrative, just like today. Many radicals who came back to Germany from their fleeing from the anti-socialist laws had lost their revolutionary fervor. And one of them,
your average defense attorney that does like family law or criminal law for people do not make that much, just throwing that out there. Okay, one thing to remember is that like Engels is directly a factory owner, okay? It doesn't change the dynamic in his advocacy in any meaningful capacity. You can literally be in certain instances a capital owner and still be very foundationally important in expressing revolutionary sentiment. Just like the labor aristocracy does not necessarily mean that you are going to, if you're a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, doesn't mean that you are going to ultimately align with the interests of the capital owning class. Okay? It doesn't work that way at all. A lot of people immediately think like, "Whoa, what the fuck? This is call out." It's not as black and white.
Was Eduard Bernstein.
Castro was the owner of a sugar farm? Yes. Fidel Castro unironically used the military, just like everywhere else, to seize whatever the land allotment was that went beyond what the government at the time decided. I forget what the exact number is. It was like a certain number of acreage. Once you went beyond it, that meant that it would be expropriated. Castro himself literally sent his own the military to his own family's sugar farm. He expropriated land from his own family.
In 1891, the SPD adopted the Erfurt program in the German city Erfurt. It was formulated by August Bebel and two gentlemen named Karl Kautsky and the aforementioned Eduard Bernstein. Engels,
400
who,
hectares.
after Marx's death in 1883, was now the chief authority on Marxism, criticized this program for its non-Marxist, opportunist view on the state. He wrote, quote, "The political demands of the draft have one great fault. It lacks precisely what should have been said. What was missing was the necessity of the dictatorship of the proletariat and a few other Marxist components." In order to understand Engels' criticism and the development of social democracy in general, it is important to learn about Eduard Bernstein. He was born in 1850 and had been in close connection to Marx and Engels. He became a central figure in the SPD, but he gained prominence by becoming known as the first major revisionist. Revisionism, simply put, means revising Marxist principles. It usually means to update them toward a liberal direction, for instance, making concessions to the capitalist class or collaborating with it, turning it from something revolutionary to something less combative. The relative stability of capitalism led Bernstein to believe that maybe the contradictions of capitalism wouldn't sharpen as Marx had analyzed. He also questioned the philosophical underpinnings of Marxism, dialectical materialism. He posed that socialism was not the dialectical solution of these contradictions, but it is a result of the free choice of people, that is, independent from their economic and social situation. It is more of a moral option instead of a social necessity, so to speak. His conclusion was that rather than aiming for revolution, the working class should be focused on reforms. It should sink itself into the bourgeoisie and incrementally change the system from within. His approach is most prominently reflected in his quote, "The ultimate aim of socialism is nothing, but the movement is everything." He was heavily criticized, most prominently by Rosa Luxemburg, the leading figure of the left line, who wrote the pamphlet Reform or Revolution. In it, she says that the dilemma between reform and revolution is meaningless because reforms should be in the service of revolution. Her arguments were convincing. By 1903, the debate appeared settled in the Dresden Congress.
I 100% agree with Rosa Luxemburg. All matter of reform should be in the revolutionary direction. That ultimately, reforms are not an end, but a means to a more just end.
In which the majority of the party formally rejected Bernstein's revisionism. Another prominent SPD.
This still does not mean that you do not participate in an unjust system. I think people misunderstand a lot of this, where they personally, this is the difference between a lot of people who come in here and they're like, Hasan, when will you give up on bourgeois democracy, blah, 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 like electoralism? No, thank you. Or people that fucking cast aside the likes of Bernie Sanders, or people that fucking constantly shit on any and every left-wing Democrat, hyper-focusing on them instead of the broader picture, instead of those who are truly working actively to harm the working class. Okay? It's silly for me in particular. I don't personally understand it because for me, I look at the immediate material conditions. I look at where class awareness is in this country, in the United States of America. I recognize America's placement on the planet as a hegemonic superpower that that is working actively to continue unequal exchange from the global South, to continue destroying and continue fomenting reactionary sentiment everywhere and anywhere it can, having its tentacles in every fucking aspect of global development. The idea that you can just like magically accelerate and not succumb to a fascist movement is silly. As literal socio-dem talk, Lamau. Well, I don't have an issue with social democrats in America, especially as long as they are not leaning in the direction of liberalism. A foundational social democratic principle would be literally fucking offering some kind of universal health care for all members of American society unconditionally. We don't even have that in America, okay? The notion that you would just like immediately jump multiple steps and be like revolution now is idiotic. It doesn't work that way.
The member who criticized Bernstein was Karl Kautsky. He was born in 1854, and after the passing of Engels in 1895, now he was regarded as one of the, if not the most prestigious Marxist theoretician. He was called by many people the Pope of Marxism. Until the outbreak of World War I, Vladimir Lenin, despite many differences, regarded Kautsky as the final authority on Marxism. But for Kautsky, revolution became something that had shifted to an indefinite future. Kautsky was part of the party center, which meant that he was against Bernstein's revisionism, but also against the tactics of the left, such as when Luxemburg argued to push for mass strikes against the state after the strike wave of the early 20th century. It was the Pope of Marxism who criticized her. And it was this party center, being in seemingly equal distance from the right revisionism and the revolutionary left, that played a key role in conceding more and more to the right under the guise of not in.
Lenin literally acknowledged her analysis on reform in liberal democracies in Europe. People don't get this. People just act as if she means electoralism is the end-all be-all. It's not. She emphasizes the revolutionary Marxist party should be participants in bourgeois electoral process to instill revolutionary principles.
Endangering party unity. However, for those not fully aware of inner party struggles, German social democracy still seemed to be committed to socialist revolution. In the meantime, the day-to-day practice of the SPD was fully committed to non-revolutionary activities. The defeat in the general elections of 1907 convinced the leaders that it was the extreme left and their revolutionary phraseology that was responsible for their loss in support, a charge reminiscent of today's liberal parties. One of the core issues of that campaign was the German colonization of Southwest Africa. A large part of the party leadership came quite close to the politics of the growing pro-monarchist parties, with some even using Marxist terminology to justify national defense and even colonialism. Also reminds us of many supposed Marxists today. The right line came to increasingly dominate the social democratic organizations, especially when it came to responsibilities in fields such as finance, the newspapers, trade union leadership, and the running of election campaigns. This was reflected in the composition of party membership, which came to be increasingly dominated by proprietors of small businesses. In 1907, less than 15% of the membership was composed of those who fell under the label workers. In 1911, about 50% of the members were represented by only 27% of delegates. There was an increasing discrepancy between the leaders and the led, with the petty bourgeois section disproportionately being part of the leadership. This rightward shift culminated when Friedrich Ebert, leader of this right line, became party secretary in 1906 at the age of 36, and after the passing of August Bebel, became the chairman of the party in 1913. Ebert was known as an efficient organizer, intensely practical and cold. He would soon prove to be the chief ally of the bourgeoisie. History mainly remembers two names of the communist movement in this time in Germany. Those are Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, courageous fighters for the working class who were to be murdered in the same January night in 1919. But in truth, those two merely represented a whole revolutionary current rapidly growing in Germany, little by little separating itself from the SPD. Born into the party in 1871 as the son of Wilhelm Liebknecht, one of the party's founders, Karl Liebknecht was to become known to many as the personification of German Bolshevism. The lawyer was imprisoned for 18 months under the charge of high treason in 1907 after publishing his popular pamphlet Militarism and Anti-Militarism, which made him the boogeyman of the German nationalists and a hero of the socialist struggle. The SPD leadership looked at
Yes, I'm gonna do Rust today. I'm gonna do Rust today. I'm gonna do Rust today. It's literally pinned. It is also in my fucking title. What is wrong with everyone? Please. This is why I tell you all the time, like, just simply putting this stuff everywhere, plastering it everywhere, doesn't change the reality that people still unironically would just come in here and be like, when are you going to do, are you going to do Rust today? I don't really understand. When are you going to play Rust? Okay.
Liebknecht with condescension. They saw him as a loud child who cannot be controlled. People described Liebknecht as passionate, impulsive, and courageous. Known as a great speaker and agitator rather than a distinguished theoretician or organizer, he was soon to meet a situation big enough to match his powers. Clara Zetkin was another leading figure. A close friend of Rosa Luxemburg, she led the Socialist Women's Organization and was the editor of its paper Die Gleichheit, Equality. Franz Mehring was another prominent figure. He had been more moderate, but eventually broke from Kautsky in 1910 and drew closer to Luxemburg. He was one of the older left-wingers and was known for his clear-headed analyses. Mehring, Zetkin, Liebknecht, Luxemburg, and others would later form the Spartacus League, named after the famous leader of the slave revolt in the Roman Republic. The Spartacus League was not the only formation of the left. left. Another group, mainly based in the city of Bremen, was referred to as the Left Radicals and would later form the International Communists of Germany, or short, the IKD. Among this group of people were Johann Knief, the leading figure, worker-turned-journalist Paul Fröhlich, and an intellectual from Hamburg called Laufenberg. They were critical of the Spartakists for not fully breaking with the Social Democrats and forming a fully independent organization of revolutionaries. The International Communists of Germany and the Spartacus League would later merge into the Communist Party of Germany. Another group of people who were to play a great role in the German Revolution were the revolutionary shop stewards. Although not organized wholly as an autonomous group, it referred to a group of militant organizers from the powerful Berlin Metal Workers Union, which were soon to lead powerful strikes in Germany. Their leader, Richard Müller, said that their goal was to establish in Germany a council republic in the Russian style. However, none of these men caused so much respect and sometimes outright fear as a woman from Polish origin. Rosa Luxemburg was born in Poland, which was under the Russian Empire, and became a German citizen in 1897. Like Lenin and other socialists, she emigrated to Switzerland in 1888, as Switzerland was a popular refuge for socialist activists at the time. There she met Leo Jogiches, who was to become one of her closest allies as a close partner in the Spartacus League. Together they founded the social democracy of the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania, and played a great part in Poland during the Russian Revolution of 1905, which got them several months in prison. However, she's mostly known for the role she played in German social democracy. In 1910, the most famous social democratic papers, Vorwärts and Die Neue Zeit, refused to publish her articles arguing for a mass strike. Franz Mehring and other left-wingers increasingly became subject of party censorship as well. Karl Kautsky, who was the founder and editor of Die Neue Zeit, was chiefly responsible for this. Already in 1895, Engels was angry at Kautsky and Bernstein for editing his introduction to an edition of The Class Struggles in France, written by Marx in 1850. They had edited it in a way that made it seem like he was a proponent of a peaceful path to socialism. From 1910, Mehring, Luxemburg, and Anton Pannekoek, an influential Dutch Marxist in Germany, finally broke with Kautsky completely. At the time, repudiating Kautsky was not an easy thing to do. Even Lenin, who would later drag Kautsky in his writings as a renegade and opportunist, didn't think it was a good idea at the time, calling Luxemburg's accusations against Kautsky an exaggeration. Amidst heatening imperialist pressures, Luxemburg was again prosecuted in 1913 after making an anti-militarist statement in a speech. She was known as an effective polemicist, orator, and a teacher. Lenin later called her an eagle. Although a great critic of the revisionist line, she still clung to being part of the social democratic organizations. Many Marxists would criticize her for not putting enough emphasis on independent leadership, clinging on being part of a mass party, even if that party leadership has an incorrect political line. Rosa Luxemburg was a great organizer and revolutionary. However, there was, according to Pierre Brouet, a great price to pay for her refusal and failure to organize into a cohesive, independent left force before the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the first global war, and a war which would change the socialist movement forever. More often than not, the story of World War I begins with the murder of Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, by Serbian teenager Gavrilo Princip, after which Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia and then suddenly drags all the superpowers into a global war. Of course, the real causes behind the war go much deeper. Among the most important ones was the increasing success of German capitalism, which caused trouble for its rivals. While weaker in terms of industry, Britain and France had vast empires which came into conflict with Germany's expansionist interests. They sought to protect their territories by allying with Tsarist Russia against Germany, who was allies with the decaying Turkish Empire and Austria-Hungary. These competing blocs caused increasing friction in Southeast Europe, Africa, or the Middle East.
Let's not get into that too much, you know what I mean? Let's not, I mean, that's neither here nor there, you know what I mean? It's just, it happens, you know, it happens.
Matter of time before these tensions would explode into a worldwide war. For Lenin, the First World War and its politics cannot be understood without grasping the underlying economic essence of imperialism. In one of the prefaces of Lenin's seminal Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin writes, quote, "The war of 1914-18 was imperialist, that is, an annexationist, predatory war of plunder on the part of both sides. It was a war for the division of the world, for the partition and repatriation of colonies and spheres of influence of finance, capital, etc. Proof of what was the true social, or rather the true class character of the war is naturally to be found not in the diplomatic history of the war, but in an analysis of the objective position of the ruling classes in all the belligerent countries. And this summary proves that imperialist wars are absolutely inevitable under such an economic system, as long as private property and the means of production exists. The tens of millions of dead and maimed left by the war, a war to decide whether the British or German group of financial plunderers is to receive the most booty. The seeming stability of capitalism, so much praised and emphasized by the revisionists, turned into bloody class conflict and the most deadly war humanity had seen within days. The general mood in Germany at the outbreak of the war is typically portrayed with joy, enthusiasm, and lust for adventure. Women sprawling flowers over the marching soldiers. While partly true, more recent research has further revealed that this picture is a myth and does not quite represent the whole sentiment of the early days. In Berlin alone, there were 50,000 pro-war demonstrators against 100 to 200,000 anti-war protesters, which are often not mentioned. In fact, even before the outbreak of the war, huge masses, even among the more conservative ones, went to the streets to protest against the looming war.
Why do you love glazing the Ottomans so much, Hassan? Aren't you meant to be anti-imperialist? Because I love the Ottoman Empire. Because under the Ottoman Empire, no one would see a 3-minute ad break because everyone would be subscribed to the top of the hour.
Supposed mass support for the war is among the reasons Social Democrats then and today try to justify the SPD voting for the Kaiser's war credits. On the 25th of July 1914, the party issued an anti-war statement, which read, "The class-conscious German proletariat raises a flaming protest against the machinations of the warmongers. Not a drop of any German soldier's blood must be sacrificed to the power hunger of the Austrian ruling clique, to the imperialist profiteer." A mere 10 days later, on August the 4th, the party declared it would be voting for the government's war credits. It proclaimed, "For our people and its peaceful development, much, if not everything, is at stake in the event of the victory of Russian despotism."
Just good thing Germany does not have that same militaristic smoke in the aftermath of World War II against